Item 6B.
Thank you, Madam Chair. And I can't say this enough that as Ms. Gates mentioned that this is our 7th time, and I just hope people don't take it for granted because it happens every year, but it doesn't happen in a vacuum. It happens because of these two wonderful people here. And it usually, now I figured out about when the announcements come because I get a message from Mrs. Gates that says, guess what are you doing on the 14th? You don't have to tell me anymore. I'm just going to assume. But thank you both for everything and the partnership, and our kids have a blast. And I did have the experience of driving in the convoy once. So you're crying now? Wait till you see them out there tomorrow. So enjoy, you deserve it. Our next guest, not to be outdone, but sorry, Michelle, is our Chief Academic Officer, Michelle Middleton, who's going to do a presentation on data. But before she begins and as she gets set up, I just want to sort of remind the board what we've instituted since the beginning of this school year. So the very first meeting of the year that we had, we used that as an opportunity to define what the district's equity statement would be, and in turn, the board actually adopted that as your own, and pleased to present that the town council actually jumped on that as well. Our next formal meeting that we had with the board, we did a presentation on our social emotional learning program that we had in the district, as you all recall. And we did that because, like with the equity statement, a lot of people had their own definition of what it was. And I think it's important for you and for the members of the public to know what definition, what we believe in, what we're working toward. The next, as I had mentioned through one of my reports, is that, and this has kind of been a reoccurring theme, is the world has changed a lot, particularly over the last few years. And I mentioned that there are some changes structurally around the district that we have to make in order to adapt to what our kids' needs are now. One of them is sitting in front of you. And Ms. Middleton, who's always been our Chief Academic Officer, but I'll use this opportunity to thank her because over the years, she has taken on a lot more things that maybe didn't have a direct connection to academics at times, and that's our fault, my fault. But we needed to allow her to refocus on what our kids' needs academically were going to be, particularly coming out of the last few years. The next time I had an opportunity to talk to you guys in this format, you may recall I put some state data up on the screens to show you and the public who we were. What were the makeup of our kids? And it was the high needs data that I was able to obtain from EdSite through the state of Connecticut, so that everyone can have an understanding about what the needs of our kids are. The next phase in this rollout process is obviously what you're about to hear from Michelle now with our assessments from our state assessments over the past year, but also some other talking points that we wanted to make sure that the public was aware of and that you as board members are aware of. And I know some of you typically goes through the curriculum committee first, so some of you have already seen this, but it's important for the entire board to hear it and also the public, and most importantly, what we're doing to address the needs of our kids. So that said, and I'll finish up with the last piece when Michelle is done. So I may interrupt you once, but I'll try not to.
Okay, is this all right? Okay. So I'm here to talk about assessment scores, so I'm just going to go on. The first slide I have is a summarization of goals that we have as a district for this year for math and ELA. And ELA, when we talk about ELA and these state mandated tests, it is reading and writing combined. So sometimes you hear it reading, sometimes you hear it English, sometimes you hear ELA. That's why. Our district-wide goal is for all of our students in K-12 to show growth in the mastery of the skills and understanding of the standards of math and ELA as shown by their performance from the fall to the spring assessments. I should say that we're not judging this growth on solely, throughout the year, we will not be judging this growth based on the data I'm going to be showing you because those tests happen once a year. So how are we going to monitor the growth and the progress? We're going to use these assessments for the data monitoring. So we have iReady Math Diagnostic in grades K through 8. I'm sure most of you parents have heard about that. And the iReady Reading Diagnostic in K through 5. Running records K through 5. Pre and post reading and writing unit assessments also happen K through 8. And at the high school, we have district created common assessments for English and math. So English 9, 10, and 11 have common assessments, and math that goes by subject area, it goes by Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2, Pre-Calculus, and therefore, and so on. So that's the data that we're looking at. here's how we're looking at that data. We are, the department coordinators, teachers, building administrators, they meet regularly to review data and discuss next steps. They meet in department meetings, some professional development sessions, leadership meetings, and they have collaborative planning time at different levels as well. And they get in sometimes to talk about that as well. We also have reinstituted our student achievement meetings this year. So the elementary will come in 3 times a year, actually. Next week are our first ones with both of them. Primary will come in together and intermediate will come in together. And they will meet at central office with Chris, Andy, myself. They will meet with the proper math, well, Jay LeMay says K-12 math, and whoever the reading coordinator is, because it's Adrian Snow, K-2, and it's Deb Gaskell, 3-5. And I've already given them a list of the data that they bring to each of the meetings, what they bring in December, what they'll bring in March, what they'll bring in June. They have worked together to put together a PowerPoint presentation to present to us so we can look at all the data from all the schools at the same time. We can have discussions about what's working, where are outliers, where is there more growth, where is there less growth, what is going on, and what our next steps are going to be. And then secondary principals, Andrew Barrios and Aaron Clark, they meet with me monthly. And starting in December, depending on the data calendar at the high school, different coordinators will be coming in with their data to do the exact same thing with Aaron and Andrew. In that case, though, the coordinators will present their department's data to us, both for 6-8 and 9-12, and we will discuss next steps and what seems to be working and what needs some monitoring and interventions. Okay. So in this presentation, I have assessment scores for Smarter Balance, both ELA and math. That's given in grades 3 through 8. SAT School Day is grade 11, and yes, it is the reason it's called SAT School Day is it is the regular SAT just without the writing portion, and the state has made that the mandated assessment for grade 11. And our students get to take that in school for free, and they can have their scores go to colleges. So that does happen in March or April. I believe they give us a window in March and a window in April. Next generation science assessments, they're given in grades 5, 8, and 11. So that's not given yearly. It's given once at the intermediate, once at the middle, and once at the high. And then the graphs I have are going to show you comparisons between us and the state. Cohort growth, comparisons between 2018, 19 and 2021, 22. So the year before the pandemic and last year's data. And then also internal comparisons of ourselves between 2020 to 2021 and 21 and 22. The reason it's just internal is the state did not release that information publicly. Each district got their own. The state did not release state data. It just went to districts. So we can compare with ourselves, basically. But I think it's good to look at the first year of testing after the pandemic and then what happened last year. Okay. So this is the Smarter Balance assessments for ELA, grades 3 through 5. EPS is blue and Connecticut is yellow. So I'm just going to let you look at that for a second. If I move up slide too fast, just let me know. This is math for 3 through 5. And again, we are blue. And what's the matter?
Mm-hmm. Okay. I was just going to share the clarification of the number, the percentages, students who meet or exceed.
Yes, these are students that, if your child received, thank you. If your child received their individualized report and they received a 3 or a 4, they are in this percentage. 3 is meeting and 4 is exceeding the expectations of the state. That's going to be that's the data for all of this. And again, so we are blue and the state is yellow. Then we get to the middle school, where it is ELA for 6-8, obviously, and the scores are right there. Math for grades 6 through 8. SAT School Day, this is us compared to the state for, and again, it's just that one grade level that's tested at the high school. This is NGSS, the science assessment for grades 5, 8, and 11, us versus the state. 11th grade did a pretty good job. Just throwing it out there. So this is comparing before the pandemic to last year, and this is able to be a cohort comparison. So the blue shows students that were in grade 3 in 2018, 2019, our last normal year, and the yellow is them in grade 6 last year. So ELA is on the left and math is on the right. This is the SAT school day. This cannot be a cohort comparison because, again, it's only given once in grade 11, so you can't compare. They don't take it again. So this is just pre-pandemic, post-pandemic for grade 11 students. In science, however, we were able to do a comparison because of the way the grades fall. So the first one on the left is the students in grade 5 pre-pandemic and grade 8 last year. And on the right, it is the students in grade 8 pre-pandemic and grade 11 last year. Okay, these next slides are a comparison between 2020, 2021, and 21 to 22. I do want to say we have to remember that in the year 2020 to 2021, we were hybrid. They were in a couple days, they were home a couple days. And the other thing is there was remote learning. And the other piece was there was also remote testing allowed by the state, which they allowed that one time because so many schools were hybrid. So to get the testing in, they put in a remote testing option. So some students actually did test from home, not many, but some. So this is also a cohort comparison. The blue is the year 2020 to 2021, and the yellow is 21 to 22. The first set of scores are when they were in 3rd grade to 4th grade, 4th grade to 5th grade, and 5th grade to 6th grade, and these are ELA. Okay. Same kiddos, same grade levels, same years, just math. Now we have 6-8. So it's actually grade 6 to grade 7, and grade 7 to grade 8. And the same students for math. So just the different assessments, but same kids. I know that you already know that the SAT school day is not a cohort comparison, so I won't say it again. But the blue is the hybrid year, and the yellow is last year. And again, with a 2-year comparison and the gaps in the science, these are not cohort comparisons, but the blue is the hybrid year, and last year is the yellow. Those are all the graphs. Now we get into the strategies that we're putting in place. So for English language arts, we're using the assessments that I mentioned at the beginning of the presentation. I do outline some of them here as well. That data is used to help guide instruction at all levels, right? So teachers are looking at where the kids are, and they are making adjustments to their instruction based on their students. Under K-5 iReady diagnostic, I talk about that the data informs Tier 2 and Tier 3 small group instruction. I want to clarify a little bit. Tier 1 instruction is for all students. That is the foundation. All students get best practices in instruction, and includes differentiation. Tier 2 is students that need a little more support. And the classroom teachers in the K-5 level, they pull students into small groups to work on the skills that they need help on, and they group the kids by common areas of weakness. And that usually, that instruction will take place 2 to 3 times a week. Tier 3 is a more intensive targeted intervention and support, and that is students are They receive that support by the language arts consultants in the building. Now, the Tier 2 and Tier 3 instruction does not replace Tier 1 instruction. It just supplements it. It does not supplant it. So those are the different types of supports. So I just wanted to kind of lay that out there a little bit for you. We also have MyPath, which is part of the iReady. Once they take the diagnostic, MyPath kind of tells the kiddos, like it assesses where they are. And if I go on, I have my own personalized instruction based on my scores and what I did well on and what I did not do well on. And it meets me where I am, and it supports me and brings me up further in my learning. We've already talked about the pre and post reading and writing assessments. We're also using another tool from Ready, which is growth monitoring assessments in grades 1 through 5, and those are used 4 times a year. They are given in months where they are not taking the diagnostic. So it's just another assessment to put in between to kind of assess students' learning. LLI is a reading intervention, level literacy intervention, and that is a tool that we are in year 2 of using in our Tier 3 instruction for our reading students. This is the first year that all K2 buildings are using the Haggerty Phonics program to help support and supplement their reading instruction at the K2 level. And then the model of teaching in all of our ELA classes, K through 12, is that it allows time for student practice and application of the skills that the teacher has presented to them. So they can work in class on those items while the teacher is going around either working with a small group or supporting the students as they are applying the skills. Math has the iReady diagnostic as well and the MyPath. It just has it in K8, whereas reading is only K5. The Tier 2 and Tier 3 and Tier 1, it is the exact same structure. The only difference in math is that math consultants deliver Tier 3 instruction. And what we're doing this year, too, Jay LaMesa spent a lot of time over the summer with some teachers doing some work on the prerequisite skills, which iReady kind of lays out for you, what skills students need to be able to understand to get to their next grade level material. And so we're using that as a proactive approach to make sure students are all ready for access to grade level material. So prerequisites, that's a Tier 1, and that's a Tier 1 strategy for all students. And these are skills that students have already been exposed to in prior grades, but it's a check in their understanding because they have to understand that skill to be able to effectively access the grade level material. And an example of that is a student has to have mastered or understand place value in order to move on to 2-digit addition. So so if you're going into a 2-digit addition unit, place value would be the prerequisite skill that you're going to review Tier 1 with all of your students. And then what you do is, if, for example, I'm having a harder time catching on, that might be my Tier 2 focus by the classroom teacher before we get to that unit. So that's something that we're doing at the K-8 level. They're actually also doing it in 9th grade because the last bullet talks about the fundamental math, focuses on the upcoming skills in Algebra 1, and the students that are in fundamental math are reviewing those prerequisite skills so they can be successful in Algebra 1. Jay has also implemented some new assessments at the high school level for check-ins and practice for students. So Algebra 1 and Geometry have weekly targeted spiral review assignments that are completed in Delta Math, which is a new program that we have. It takes them step by step through the problems. And Algebra 2 and Pre-Calculus are using weekly SAT assignments that they complete in Ingenuity. So somebody doesn't like Delta Math. Okay. I wasn't sure if it was a fan or not a fan. Excellent. Thumbs up. I like thumbs up. Excellent. Oh, good. Excellent. Thank you. I saw it in action last week, and I thought it was pretty good, too. So we're on to next steps. And I'm sure one thing stuck out to you, which I didn't mention as we went through. Grade 8 scores took a dip in all 3 subject areas. So the question is, what factors impacted grade 8 last year? And I have a couple of bullets underneath.
This is where I get to interrupt. I wonder. So I want to mention this tonight because it's been publicly reported recently about chronic absenteeism data that's been released by the state of Connecticut. So I know it wasn't in time for Michelle to include that, and I had gotten a few questions from some board members about how our absenteeism rate is calculated this year. So do you know district-wide? I'm asking you two ways. What was our district chronic absentee rate level pre-pandemic?
Pre-pandemic, as a district, it was 10%.
And what is it currently?
21 last year.
Okay, last year. Mm-hmm. What was JFK's pre-pandemic?
JFK's pre-pandemic was 8.4.
What was it last year?
32.9.
Okay, I want to pause there for a second. I'm mentioning this because this is not the first time I said this in this room or at this dais. That 32% of JFK does not differentiate why those kids were absent. So and I have a personal philosophical difference with the state of Connecticut on how they calculate that, and I have let my feelings be known to the commissioner and the commissioner's entire brass, as well as a lot of my colleagues. And the reason for that is what happened during last year and the year before that may be a contributing factor as to why everyone's chronic absentee numbers are so high. So how many people in this room were known over the last 2 years were considered a close contact of someone who was a positive COVID case? It's hypothetical, but rhetorical. We all were. How many? Prior to last spring, does anybody recall what the requirements, not by us, but what we were responsible to carry out, the requirements as being a close contact of a positive COVID case? You had to quarantine for 10 days. Well, if you're a student in a classroom and you got quarantined twice by us, and when I say us, meaning the state of Connecticut, meaning the State Department of Education and the State Department of Public Health, created the guidelines that we had to adhere to on the quarantine measures. So don't blame Nurse Jess and the crazy flow charts that we've seen over the last couple of years. We didn't create that, but we were responsible for implementing that. If you're a student, and I'll pick on our student reps, and you were exposed twice, you are chronically absent and you run the risk of losing credit because we would have kept you home for 20 days. I also want to take a step back because it is relevant to, and we don't have hard data at this point, but we'll find it. When we look at the impact of what happened in grade 8 last year, and one of the things that we have to address, and again, I know there's going to be some people who think that, well, you're just using COVID as an excuse. I'm not trying to infer that. But we have to look at this through a realistic lens. If we were keeping kids home, and the data shows our absentee numbers are wicked high, we know why. And the state of Connecticut, and then part of the argument that I had with the state was, no, we understand that those numbers are really skewed a bit because that includes COVID, that includes quarantine. But an absence is an absence, so we're still going to calculate it this way. That didn't sit well with me or my colleagues, and we fought the good fight, but we didn't win. It's in there. But in that 38% that's at JFK, that doesn't differentiate what was a COVID, what was a quarantine, or what was an actual truancy. Nonetheless, we will be, zapped by the state because our chronic absentee numbers are so high. However, the reason that those numbers are so high is because we were sending kids home because we had to, because the state told us that's what we had to do. Again, I'm not pointing fingers. People need to know this through a realistic lens. The other thing that does have an impact that we do need to talk about was when we sent, I'll pick on you, Caleb, when we sent you home for 10 days. During that, Michelle had referenced the hybrid year. What we couldn't do last school year was if I sent you home for 10 days, and these are real life conversations I'll share with you that I had with parents, was you can go home. Thank you for telling us that you were exposed. Thank you for being honest and upfront. I sat in this thing and begged people, just be honest with us. If you have it, we'll do the best we can. If we send you home, what was different last year than in the previous year was two things we couldn't do any longer. Remote learning or dual instruction, because it was illegal. And if anybody wants to verify whether or not the legality behind remote instruction, I'll pick on you, Morgan. Do you remember what happens on PSAT days for seniors at Enfield High School?
We sit in the auditorium.
Okay. Or you are excused absence if you have a college visit or a job or a career counseling day or something along those lines, because seniors don't take PSATs. During the hybrid year, we had made an announcement, because we were still doing asynchronous learning, because that was approved and legal, that we let seniors know you don't have to come to school on PSAT day. You can use that as an asynchronous learning day. Last year, we sent out the message to seniors a few days prior to PSAT day that we sent the same message out by accident. Within 1 hour, I got a call from the commissioner's office that says, what you're doing in Enfield High School is illegal. And when I explained, what are you talking about? And realized, oh no, they just didn't change the message from last year. It was okay, we weren't in trouble, but it took 1 hour for the state to realize, if you do any kind of remote learning, you're breaking the law. So when you look at these figures and you realize kids aren't in school, what weren't they getting when that absentee number is so high? They weren't just missing being in school. What were they missing? They were missing instruction. And there was nothing we can do about it. Now, I got to commend our teachers, because when we sent you home for 10 days, we would tell you, you still have access online through your devices. Your lessons will be posted. Your assignments will be posted. And if you have any questions or concerns, your teacher will get back. Email your teacher. They will get back to you as soon as they can. But nothing can supplement a real-time instruction from a teacher. I use my own kids because I get this a lot from parents. A lot of parents are unhappy with this. They would call me. These are real conversations. There's 2 examples I'll give you. One parent called and said, listen, my son played a basketball game yesterday. I just got a call on Monday morning, just got a call on Sunday night from the coach that said there was a positive COVID case. What do I do? Thank you for calling us. Thank you for being honest, because a lot of parents just look the other way. But unfortunately, under the rules, you got to quarantine for 10 days. Understand. What does this mean for my kid's school? Well, I explained what I just explained. So wait a second. Why can't my kid just dial into class and not miss out on anything? Unfortunately, that's the law. That's the rules. You can't. It's illegal to have remote learning, and it's illegal to do dual instruction. That's the only thing we're technically allowed to offer. I often get, well, that's okay, but if it were your kid, you wouldn't be happy with this. Understandably. This actually happened to my own kid. My daughter, who was a freshman in high school last year, was exposed to COVID. No symptoms, wanted to go to school, but I said to my daughter, if for some reason you end up with it and they contact trace it back to a superintendent's kid as a super spreader, that's not going to be a good look. So unfortunately, kiddo, you got to stay home. More than once. And how many of you woke up in the last 2 years with a scratchy throat or congested, and the first thing you thought of was, I got it? We beg people, please stop don't, if you're sick, stay home. But we couldn't offer them real-time instruction because it wasn't permitted. So, and I'll just finish up on that, because this is one of the biggest questions that I will get, and you guys will ultimately get too at the end of the year. Some of you got them last year. All of those days that people did the right thing and either stayed home or reported that they were exposed and missed out. I knew as a parent that my child wasn't going to have the same level of understanding and success academically. She's not the kid. She thrives in a regular classroom with real-time instruction. I knew there was going to be a sacrifice for that, but we were trying to do the right thing to keep her home. That happened more than once throughout the year. Guess what my kid got is the same thing where a lot of parents are watching this tonight. They got the letter. I got the letter. And I know what it feels like to get the letter, because immediately you think you're a terrible parent, your kid's truant, and you're going to miss credit because you kept your kid home from school. And on the letter, it says the days where your kid was absent. And I knew that the reason my kid was absent all those days is because I was trying to do the right thing to keep my kid home. It doesn't matter. The state requires us to send that truancy letter home. Now, we have a little bit of leeway when it comes to missing credit and things like that is within our judgment. But my point to all this is, what I couldn't replace for my own kid and for some of these kids that we were forced to keep home was, nothing will replace real-time instruction with a teacher. So when we look at numbers like, our absentee rates, there is a legitimate, fallout from that. But when you look at it, it can't just be, well, you got to do a better job getting your kids at school. For this particular year, we were forced to keep kids out of school. And we didn't have the same tools that we had the previous year to say, look, I know you got to be home. Dial in on your iPad. At least you can get some FaceTime with your teacher. I got to commend our teachers. They did the best they could, and they went above and beyond answering questions. But if you're in a math, you're in a geometry class and you have a problem right now at 10 in the morning when you're doing it, and you send an email to your teacher and your teacher responds back at 2 because they have a job to do, something's going to get lost in translation. And that's what happens. And I just think people need to realize what the realistic world that we lived in over the last couple of years, what the real fallout of what everyone has experienced had to do with our kids. We said this from the minute we closed school on March 13, 2020. This is going to be a generational issue. You know, we know kids that are referred to, some of you may be baby boomers or Gen Xers. COVID kids is going to be a real thing. And that's not going to be a stigma, but it's going to be what happened to our kids during this time. So that's why when I'm glad Michelle mentioned we're not just focusing on just the standardized tests here. We're focusing on growth because we just got them back. And what are we going to do to make their needs, make sure that we're meeting their needs, because their needs are not the same today as they were 2 years ago, 3 years ago when they left. I think I covered everything. Sorry, Michelle.
My back, yeah, okay. The other thing, this is not a question, and it's not anything that would have impacted grade 8. It's something that happened this year, is a new team was added for grade 8 at the middle school. There were four teams, for 6th grade, 4 7th grade, and there's been 3 8th grade for a number of years. And with the opening of the new building and the space, a 4th team was added. So that will impact this year with class sizes and, coordinating of teachers and alignment and things like that. So that is a positive.
I forgot one other thing, because I'm fixated like a lot of you are on what happened in grade 8. We also have to remember, we're talking about absenteeism and we're talking about quarantining. What did the vast majority of our 8th graders do during last school year? Where did they live when they were at JFK? They lived in what's called a swing space, either in the old cafeteria or the old library. And that part of the facility of the building was built to keep as many kids as we can fit in a classroom while the wings were demolished and rebuilt. That was designed in 2019. The swing spaces at JFK were not designed when something called social distancing was a thing. So a lot of our kids were in those rooms, which the fallout with that is if there was a positive COVID case in that classroom, the likelihood of quarantining was greater for a larger group of kids because they were closer in proximity, but we had nowhere else to put them. We did the best, believe me, our nursing staff, our teachers, everybody went above and beyond to social distance, mask, keep everybody away to stop spreading this thing. But the reality is, if there was more kids in a classroom, in all likelihood, more kids had to quarantine, which in turn could have created that fallout of more kids are out of school and in turn less FaceTime instruction, which have an impact on how our scores for that 8th grade. I forgot about the classroom, sorry.
Okay. So because we are asking questions about 8th grade, we have to they are now in 9th grade. So what are we doing for our 9th grade students now? What interventions are we putting into place? So coordinators are working with their teachers on, differentiation and tiered interventions, looking at tier 1 and making sure that there is differentiation within the classroom. Erin Clark and I talked, and she also is going to explore reintroducing transition supports, such as something called Fresh Start Check-In at EHS. And that is when the administration and the counselors look at the 9th graders that are struggling, and they divide the kids up, and they each take a caseload. And they meet regularly with those kids, check in with them, just make sure that they're getting the support that they need. So it's an extra person at the high school looking out for a struggling 9th grader to try to help them be successful. So, and then the last piece I have is the department coordinators, which are all K-12 now. So they're going to continue to be a consistent presence in the classrooms at all levels to see what is happening with instruction. What do our teachers need? What do the kiddos need? What's working? What's not working? What can we take from one classroom or one even content area and bring to another to improve that tier 1 instruction? They're also working with the secondary teachers during their department time and their PD sessions. They have department time at least once a month, sometimes twice, with each of their JFK and Enfield High folks. They alternate between faculty meetings. So when JFK has a faculty meeting, Enfield High has a department meeting, and vice versa. They're working with their K-5 teachers during flex block times, and there's some collaborative meeting times that they're invited in as well. And they're working with teachers at all levels on instructional strategies that will increase student engagement and or increase the mastery of student skills. This is the tier 1 piece, right? So we have to look at how to make it as effective as possible. So one of the things I'm talking to them about is looking at the initiatives we had in place before the pandemic that were working and making a difference. And now, are they in place now? Because some of them, social distancing, hybrid learning, they didn't translate. So if they were working before, is it something we can bring? Is it in place now? Why not? Should it be? And then the other thing is, as Chris has said, reevaluating the students in front of us and what they need and what will work for them. And the last thing that department coordinators are going to continue to do is work with the building administrators to help implement school-wide goals and mission. It's really important that everybody's on the same page so that teachers are hearing the same message, and so the coordinators are doing following the vision of the school, which aligns to the vision of the district, before you asked. That's what I have.
I'm going to cut you off now before you get to questions. Just to wrap up the other next step. Just based on the last piece that Michelle mentioned, that our department coordinators are all K-12 now. We talked earlier about sort of the phases that led up to tonight's presentation, doing some restructuring district-wide to meet the needs of our kids now. In addition to being all K-12, they're all 12 months now. The other thing that she left out, but I could say, is now all of our department coordinators report directly to Michelle. So we had to realign the staff that we had to meet the needs of the kids that we're having, the needs that our kids are having today. And lastly, before we get into your questions, this was the sort of the 5th step of this phase of rolling out how our new reality is to you, as I started this with before Michelle spoke. The last culminating piece of this is our budget, or at least the budget that I'm going to present to you, hopefully in January, if not February. I always say that because you don't know what the weather's going to do. That said, it's going to look a little different than it's looked in the past, because we now know where our priorities are. We have a better, someone had asked us, well, what are you going to do to assess, what we've been through over the last couple of years? We couldn't do that until we knew where our kids were. So we had to identify who our kids were. We had to identify what they've been through and the areas of focus. That budget is going to reflect the needs of our kids. And it may not look, if those of you are looking for just a spreadsheet again, you're going to be disappointed. But I think when we talk about making structural institutional changes around here, this is the big part. We need to put our money where our mouth is and put our money behind what we're doing to help our kids. So that's the culminating part of the entire structure that I've been rolling out secretly since September. And I want to thank Michelle, because I know she's had many sleepless nights trying to figure out why each number went in a different direction. And I've had to tell her the same thing I've told you guys, and I'll pick on Mr. LeBlanc because he said this once before during another meeting. We can't look at it the same way anymore. It's almost like a reset. We can't look, okay, well, this was like this 10 years ago. 10 years ago, the world was a much different place. And now we have hard proof as to what our kids went through and how it affected them. What I'm worried about is, what are we doing next? Michelle is a very, she's going to get mad at me for saying this, type A person, but she wants to know in front of her, and she's getting better at it. That's a compliment, Michelle. But we all have to start thinking a little bit differently around here. And I commend Michelle for doing that and coming from a different place, and also having the direct line of all of our coordinators who are kind of in different roles now, being in 12 months and being all K-12, to really set forward in motion the changes that we need to make. So that said, I'll shut up.
Now it's questions for you guys.
Thank you so much. Does anyone have any? I know, Ms. Acree, you had a question, but if you're not ready to start, does anybody else have any comments or questions? Or Ms. Pickett? Sorry.
I want to start with a thank you, Michelle. You can put your mic down. I know that I have been a pest about this presentation and about this conversation for a very long time. And your efforts, on this presentation and your description of the efforts for Enfield Public Schools was incredibly clear, transparent. It was facts. And I just want to thank you for that because I think that's really important. And you put up with me, so I really appreciate that. I think since before even joining the board as a parent, I would come and speak about our data to some of you. So this is like where I'm excited that we're having this conversation, but I'm sitting here wanting to know how can we be helpful. So I in the mindset that we can no longer admire the problem. We know that COVID has impacted our students and staff, construction, the multiple transitions of our students, and we need solutions. So it sounds like we have some great efforts in place. With that being said, I do have some wonders. I don't expect any answers from you tonight, so really turn off your mic. You're off the hook. It's more of me to share as something maybe for Chris to reflect on that budget presentation. I'd be love to see more than a spreadsheet because I think it's important for us to understand the needs and the ways and paths forward. So with that being said, having an understanding of our needs and staff and how can we as a board support and advocate for those needs and the appropriate supports and funding. I guess what I'm looking for is our district roadmap. How is it that we are supporting our teachers? What is it? And how can we share it so everybody can be on the same page? Because it's going to take more than just you. When we talk about chronic absence, it's a family partnership. It's a community partnership. So how can we get everybody on board to support those efforts moving forward? I agree with you, Michelle. We have a clear Tier 1 issue. I'm an advocate for tiered interventions, but the way our data looks, we cannot intervene our way out of this problem. So I think having a better understanding, especially about the structure of supports for our teachers, the last thing I want to do is put something else on the plate of a teacher or place blame on a teacher. So thinking about how do we support them, thinking of the department coordinators, those structures that I'm excited to hear more about, I think that's going to be really important to highlight. As far as the tiered interventions, I'd love to better understand how we're identifying those students for intervention, how those interventions are matched to those skill needs, and how families are aware of that process. So how's it working? As a mom, we get those iReady scores home, and I will tell you, when families got them home this year, it was like, is your kid there? Is your kid there? And we're all like comparing scores, and we're like, oh, we're all in the same boat. But there was a sense of like panic. So thinking about how can we partner and ensure families are aware of that as well. I mentioned not wanting to put more on the shoulders of staff, so thinking about how can we actually lighten the load, which might sound really weird, but what are our priorities and how do we lift those with a clear plan so we can maybe take some of those other things off the plate. I was happy to see you mention attendance there. I have a lot of wonders about the other data too, things like office discipline referral or discipline in school and out of school suspension numbers, access to our school-based health centers, so thinking about mental health supports. There's lots of needs, and those two, so the SEL presentation that Chris referenced earlier, how do our behavioral supports and our academic supports really come together to support our students? And again, I just want to thank you. The presentation was thoughtful, a lot to reflect on. And I think there's obviously something that's working. There was growth from 2020, 2021 to 2021, 2022, which is surprising because kids are tested at that next grade level. So if they didn't get good prerequisite skill instruction the previous year, the fact that they grew is actually pat yourself on the back there. So thank you, and know that we're here to support what is needed to support our students.
Thank you. I will speak. Thank you.
Michelle, I just want to thank you for your very informative presentation. Yes, the data shows where our students are, and all we can do, I think, is to move forward, as Chris and you have said, by meeting them right where they are, coming up, like you in your presentation has shown, coming up with the learning strategies and the special curriculum that will meet the needs of the students right now, so they can start progressing. I do have faith in you, the teachers, the staff, administration for our district, that our students will grow that they will get to master those skills, but it's going to take time. My question was, what was the retention rate in our district?
I actually know that. Well, part of that. So K-8, it was low, and I will reach out to each individual building, and I can bring that to you in the January meeting. I do know the percentage of after summer school, the percentage of 9th grade students that were retained was 10.7. The number of 10th grade summer school students retained was 10.43, and the number of 11th grade retentions was 3.69%. So summer school helped some students, but that's what it's there for. Credit recovery is there to recover credits and move to the next grade level. There were no retentions in 12th grade.
Okay.
Last year. So, but I want to flip that data because when I was looking at that data and I was looking at the accountability index, I looked at the graduation rate. So the 4-year graduation rate, which one's ours? Okay. The 4-year graduation rate before the pandemic, the last year, 18, 19, and the 4-year graduation rate means that first-time 9th graders graduated high school in 4 years or less. And that's all students that they count, high needs, non-high needs. We were 89.6 before the pandemic. We were 91.1 last year, and that was higher than the state. We were higher than the state both years, actually. And actually even our 6-year graduation rate, and what that does is it looks at, and these are actually, a year behind because they'll report out the 21 cohort and the 21-22 school year because they need time to actually adjust the data. It's not ready for them to go into EdSite when they pull it and they start looking at things. 6-year means 9th graders that get out in 6 years or less, but that only counts for high needs students. So, but that rate went up too. We were 81.2 before the pandemic. We ended up at 85% last year for our 19 cohort because they needed 2 more, it was 2 more years. So we were above the state. The state was 88 and 89.6% for 4 years. So we were above the state both years. And we were a couple points below the state for 6-year before the pandemic, but we were pretty much right there with them last year. So that's positive numbers.
Yes.
So, but I will get you the other numbers for our next meeting.
Okay, thank you.
You're welcome.
Just a reminder, Michelle, when it comes to retention, just so everyone's attention, during the pandemic, for K-8, we weren't permitted to retain students.
Right.
I recall when we had shut down, there was automatic advancement that was a directive from the state too, so that may skew some of the figures as well.
That is true.
Mr. LeBlanc? I also told him that we spoke about the absenteeism, so he'll catch that on the.
No, I appreciate you all. And this maybe relates, and if it does, just tell me, go back and watch tomorrow, and I will. And I apologize for being late. But you spoke of, all I got before going back and watching it was the last slide of what you were presenting. And you mentioned how struggling, specifically 9th graders, are then grouped into caseloads that are then tracked throughout the year to try to get them on the right track. With that, now I don't know if it's just ninth or all other 3 remaining grades on top of 9th grade, but what can you highlight or explain what the solution is from our standpoint on a lot of struggling students has to do with the absentee rate of their attendance at school. So if they're struggling, it's more often than not their attendance goes along with that. So what are we doing as a district to try to get in touch with those students? Not only get in touch, but get them back in the school building and back in the school building on a consistent basis. I know when I was over at Holyoke Public Schools, that was a huge issue. There was a grand list of students that needed to be tracked down, and I'll be honest with you, I was not involved with it directly, but it seemed very hard to do so. So what are our strategies or solutions to that here?
Okay, so every school has an attendance team, and they meet they meet either biweekly or like they either meet every other week or like once a month at the elementary level, maybe, depending on where the attendance, the absences are. If they're high, they meet more often. The high school, I'm pretty sure, weekly, correct? They have a team that meets weekly, and they review all attendances. They contact families. They've gone out and done home visits. So they've gotten youth, used to be youth services, social services involved to help with that work. So the high school does a lot. And the reason they're focused on the 9th grade this year is because of the 8th grade drop. They want to make sure they just have an extra adult that's checking in on them to get them any supports that they need, because we're not really sure what caused, whether it was, behavioral issues, mental health issues, lack of learning time. So they want to make sure that if the administrators and the counselors have a small caseload of kids, because they're not doing the whole 9th grade, if they have a small caseload of kids that they can like make a personal relationship with and be the person that checks in with them, they found success with that in the past. But there are definitely, like at the elementary level, the primary level, they'll use FRC to help them reach out to families. So every single building has an attendance team that meets regularly and reviews.
Ms. Cushman?
Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
I'm thankful for the last 2 curriculum subcommittee meetings to have been able to attend and just be able to hear this now for the 3rd time, and with all the things that you've tweaked along the way. But there was one question I just wanted to clarify. The next generation science assessment for the grade 11, their scores were very good. And I know that there's something that's already in place in the high school that influences this. Could you explain what that is?
I think part of it is a few years ago, several years ago now, Chris Ponte came before the board and he proposed putting together pathways of courses, both if you entered at like an honors level or if you entered at, the college career prep level. So that what he did was he organized classes in this pathway so that by the time all students reached grade 11, they had exposure to all of the standards that are being assessed on the NGSS. Because what it does is in grade 5, it assesses what they've done in 3, 4, 5. Grade 8, it's what they've done in 6, 7, 8. In grade 11, it's 9, 10, and 11 standards. So Chris really thoughtfully put that together. He's also, he and his teachers have worked together to really look at increasing the student engagement in their class and performance-based assessments and just how their kids are accessing the material. And I personally believe that played a huge part in it, just his setup of it. And now, because it's been several years, we're really seeing that pay off, I think. But yes, it is noticeable.
Yeah, that's good. Thank you.
Mr. Ongeyer?
Thank you, Michelle. And a couple of questions. So I saw that your presentation highlighted absenteeism as being a major contributing factor, right? And then the superintendent mentioned things like swing spaces and as other contributing factors. Are you aware of other contributing factors other than absenteeism, other than swing spaces? Do you think there are other contributing factors?
I would guess that middle school being the formative years that they are, that if you were a student that went in 6th grade and started middle school and got sent home in March for the rest of your year, and then went back the following year a couple days a week with smaller group sizes, and then came all back together in 8th grade. It even came into 7th grade, like going back to middle school last year for everybody, but I would think especially 8th grade. I would think that it's a social year. Those are social years, and I'm not sure kids, I think they forgot how to socialize a little bit, like working together and communicating. And I do know that I've heard that there's a New York Times article that shows that this is nationwide for grade 8 as well. It's not just us, it's statewide. I mean, the state's numbers have dropped as well. So I'm not sure if the mental health and social health piece plays a part of it. I don't know. I taught middle school for years. I'm familiar with how much they change from the beginning of a middle school year to the end of it, both physically and emotionally and behaviorally. So I don't know if that impacted them. I don't know. I do know that I think last year, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think all of our secondary kiddos had a harder time coming back into the normal everybody there than the elementary kids. I think the socialization plays a big part in it. I do.
Okay. You explained well the Tier 1 and the Tier 2. Could you explain just quickly the Tier 3? What's the difference between Tier 2 and Tier 3?
Sure. Tier 2 is when you need some support, but not intensive and targeted. It is less frequent, and it is often has a few more kids in the group. Tier 3 is supposed to be your smallest number of kids. It's kind of like a pyramid, right? So Tier 1's on the bottom is a big foundation. Tier 2 is the next chunk of kids. It's smaller. And then Tier 3 is at the top, and it's the smallest. And those are the kids that are really going to need a really small group, probably 4 days a week, and they're going to need they get progress monitored regularly. The teachers teaching and monitoring and assessing and making sure, but it's targeted and it's intense. So that's kind of the difference. I don't know if it makes it's more support.
No, right now, thank you, and I understand now what
Okay.
Tier 3 is.
Sorry.
No, that's okay. I didn't get that during the presentation. And the last question, I just have one last question, is I saw the comparison between us and the state, okay,
Yes.
where we are today, all right? Going back before the pandemic, not just the year before,
Right.
but some history before the pandemic. How did Enfield compare in scores to the state?
We, in some areas, depending on the year, were higher, and in some we were right on average, and in some we were lower. I think there was less of a gap. So sometimes we were on the high end of the gap, and they were lower than we were. It was more. I wouldn't say that we were beating the state all the time. I can't really sit here and say that. But the gap was a lot less when we weren't. And I know that for SAT, for example, I know that we beat them for SAT in English. A few years we were above them. We've always been really strong in the 11th grade science as well. And the elementary ELA and math were right up or above them.
I said that was my last question, but I just spawned one other question. And it goes back to contributing factors. Are you looking at all at like the area of curriculum?
Yes. We made changes before the pandemic in our math curriculum, and we were seeing progress at our elementary math curriculum. We were seeing progress. And I think that that's why when someone, maybe I think Amanda might have said that, Mrs. Pickett, sorry, might have said that there was growth. I think that curriculum helped sustain some of that. So yes, we have been looking at that. Absolutely.
Okay, great.
Yep.
Great. Thank you.
Dr. Kalnin?
I just want to get back to the tiers. You said Tier 4 is the most.
We don't have
Tier 3.
I know, not yet. We don't have Tier 4 yet.
Maybe I need some Tier 3 support in mathematics. So you said that could be up to 4 days.
4 days, yes.
So all students, regardless of their tier level, get Tier 1, correct?
Right.
So is that going to eat into their Tier 1?
No, it does not. Those students are taught by a consultant, either language arts and math, and that time they're usually pulled out of the classroom when the classroom teacher is doing the Tier 2 intervention. So, and the students that don't need intervention are working on grade level material or other things in like stations or reading, whatever they're supposed to be doing. So the small group work is done outside of the Tier 1 instruction. Actually, you may not pull a student from the grade, because Tier 1 is the grade level material. And you can't pull the students from that, because if they miss that, then the tiers aren't going to work. You're welcome.
Well, thank you. I can end to this great presentation. I just wanted to share something because we were talking about the math numbers. I was going to save it for my board member comments, but I'm going to mention it now. I went to the Family Engagement Day at Prudence Crandall, and I was in a 4th grade class, and what they were working on at that time was math. And the fun way the kids were able to sit and practice math, like one of the games was where you put the headband on and you had to solve the equation on your head. And I am not good at fractions, and that's the first table I sat down at, and so I struggled a little bit there, but also the way the kids have learned math as compared to the way I've learned math, especially with long division. But I love the fact that we have teachers that are thinking outside the box and really making learning of math fun. I think I said it in the curriculum meeting, math is practice, and it's constant over and over and over again. And when we talk about pre-COVID and post-COVID and try to pinpoint it, there was so much going on from week to week. The kids didn't know if their whole class was going to be out, if we were going remote. That was a really big struggle on the teachers, because the teachers felt at that time, they kept saying, we feel like we're failing the kids. And if teachers had to be out, then kids were getting substitute teachers. So it was definitely a balance. But I agree, it's time to look forward, recognize what we have. I think the whole world's changed post-COVID. So some of us have changed, the kids changed. And I think we're doing a good job of recognizing the needs. It's interesting what we said about district coordinators. When I first started on the board, we actually had district coordinators like K5, 6-8, or 6-12. And through the years, with attrition and people retiring, they were expanded into like a K-12 type model. So I'm sure that's part of the challenge. And I also think the emotional and mental health really took a toll on the students, as we saw, I think, with the older kids, the kids in 6 through 12. And I think that was part of the behavioral struggle we were seeing at that grade level. But it's an exciting time to see where we can go. I would have to say the curriculum committee meetings have been excellent. I love hearing from the committee members. Janet always goes. She's an alternate. Josh always goes. But it's great to sit in there and listen to what you guys were saying, because that is like where the real work and the real conversations happen about curriculum and all the additions that we are making and changes to adapt to the needs at the high school and different things like that. So I appreciate your time tonight, and I appreciate your presentation, and we'll await the budget presentation and see how that goes.
Thank you.
Thank you.